I think architecture is inherently a generalist practice, and that's what got me interested in architecture to begin with. I couldn't really make up my mind what I wanted to do, and then I realized architecture touches everything. It's a little bit of sociology, it's a little bit of economics, politics, material, technology, design, certainly form, space. And so, for me, my practice as an editor is a form of construction or reconstruction of material. The material is words. The school is another sort of project that you're constantly formulating, reformulating. There's maybe a lot of rehabilitation involved in that practice. And then our architecture practice is another form of practice, but I think that all three actually operate in a way, in very similar ways. And so in a funny way, I just continue my generalism. If you ask anyone what is design, usually they'll say, oh, it's luxury. The association of design is, a very nice watch or a very nice table or chair or a very beautiful space. And my answer is design is actually everything. Yes, your chair, your watch, your clothes are designed, but so is your calendar, your schedule, so is the subway system, so is the regulation that keeps you from falling off your roof because of the rails that are put around. I mean, Hans Hollein said it in 1968. He said, architecture is alles, architecture is everything. And I would say, yes, it is. It's everything that surrounds us. And so I think that at the same time, as architects, we tend to forget that, or we think if architecture is everything, I need to learn everything about economics, or I need to learn everything about technology, or everything about history before I can be a designer. No, I actually think architecture is everything, or design is everything, but you, as an architect, affect that everything through form and space. I think, and public space is a very exciting place where we come together. As an architect, you encounter a broader audience. It's no longer your single client of, say, working on a personal house, but you actually have to engage. A client that you don't know, an audience you don't know, which is the bigger city, which I think is very exciting for you as an architect. But I think the urgency right now in terms of public space is that our cities all across the world, and you see this in Barcelona, are becoming more and more dense and more diverse with the population coming from around the world. I think that's amazing. That's why you want to be in a city. You're surrounded by different people, you meet different people, you learn different things. But then that puts a lot of pressure on public space as a space where these people actually encounter one another, because it's the place of chance encounters. It's where you might meet someone, whereas if you're meeting someone in an office or in your home, you have an appointment. But outside in the city, that's a place of chance encounter. And so I think in terms of whether that should be designed in a very local way or whether there's a kind of global today approach to public space, I would say it's a little bit of both. I think you have to respect a local context, but if you make it too local, you're actually forgetting the population that's coming in from elsewhere. And so I think some degree of fluidity with understanding, I see what we do as creating spaces where other people can encounter one another. And that can happen, partly those spaces are through differences of surfaces, through a bench, through planting, through a pause where you suddenly get more light and air. But I don't know if it has to be really sort of so focused on local. I think the mistake that we're making all over the world with our public spaces is we're relying on commercial programming to keep them alive. We think that that's what defines a successful public space. I think we need to step back and recognize that, again, space, form, materials, planting actually affects how we see a public space, and it can be successful even if it's not commercial. So we're at a very interesting moment in architectural discourse or design discourse, but I feel like we've been saying that for 25 years. So the turn of the century happened, and we thought, okay, This is, it's a time for a change. We've gone through, so the 60s were very clear in terms of a design discourse, activism and different practices that were more social. The 70s were a real focus on architecture as an autonomous object. The 80s and 90s, the introduction of the computer and the sort of digital, you could do different shapes. They don't all have to be rectangles. Okay, we experimented. Beautiful. And then there was a thought of, okay, we've hit a point where there will be another change. We've done these changes very sort of regularly. We're 25 years into the new century, and I feel like you can no longer say the century has just changed, even though it feels like yesterday. And so where is design discourse today? And I think it's a little bit the same thing as what you see with media, that we have so many different channels and so many different sources and so much access to information, we don't know how to focus. And so I think without some introduction of enforcing time for thinking and actually thinking through what's important, we'll continue to have this atomized culture. And I think it's for schools and it's for institutions like the CCCB to say, here's an idea that's very important, and to bring some people together and say, here's some time to actually focus on why this is important, and these are the things you're going to talk about. And I think it's hit a point where we have to recognize we have to actually make the effort, because we keep expecting it will happen maybe next year or in 2 years. It's not going to, unless we actually focus on some of the issues that are important. I think housing, climate, are two things that everyone recognizes are important, and we should be more focused on what we can do with those questions. So for schools where AI became a big fear, a big topic of fear, is trying to figure out what work is authored by the students. On the one hand, the question of authorship becomes liberating as the world becomes more fluid with materials. But in a school, you need a degree of authorship to ensure that a student is learning something. And so that's something that I think we're struggling with as a school, to discover, well, where is this using a medium that blurs authorship very quickly. And so part of it is you have to create a culture of trust and experimentation, where you ask students to be very clear when they're using these new tools and how it's actually enabling new things, but what they're actually doing. So that's I think a different kind of pedagogy that the world has to adopt. I think at a general level, I think a school of design needs to be a place where you do provide a bubble of time. I think I keep telling students, you think you're stressed out, but it's a luxury right now. You have the opportunity, you're expanding your mind and you're experimenting, and it's an incredible luxury. And as faculty, we have the luxury of working to help do that. So I think that's recognizing that it's this bubble, and allowing for a project to have the time that it needs. So whatever you're teaching, I think, is something that we have to keep in mind. But I think the other thing is school is a moment when you discover what actually drives you. So if architecture is absolutely generalist, architecture is everything, design is everything, at the same time, you can't do everything all at once, despite that movie, wasn't it? Everything Everywhere All at Once or something like that. That doesn't work in real life. And so in that time, you need to, it's our job to teach students that they need to prioritize. They need to figure out, okay, what part of this big tableau is urgent to me, that I think I can actually do something with it and carry it forward. We have an obligation to have a public voice, that we have an obligation to train our students to be able to speak to everyone from the contractor to the client to the mayor. And that's a beautiful way of understanding that there's sort of almost different languages. So we have students from 60 different countries. We have a lot of different languages in the school, but the language of understanding these different kinds of speaking, and how do you explain what interests you to someone so that they can understand it. And I think that's more and more an obligation we have if we want to stay relevant.